I'm going to declare the word of the Lord that there will be utter confusion. Listen to this. This is a word from God. There will be utter confusion during these talks.
U.S. negotiators are in Geneva for key talks on the war in Ukraine and Iran's nuclear program. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner just met with Iran's foreign minister and are also taking part in trilateral talks with Russian and Ukrainian officials.
Iran this morning announced it's going to allow International Atomic Energy Agency to visit its nuclear facilities and assess what's happening there, which is certainly a step in the right direction from the perspective of the Trump administration, who's hoping that all of these talks are going to lead to a deal with Iran. Now, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner led those negotiations today in Geneva. President Trump has said he's also going to be indirectly involved in all of these negotiations. The president already signaling some optimism that these talks will go better than they did last summer. Remember, those discussions did end with strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities.
We could add a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential. We had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
In this city, God will not allow judgment to come from the city to Israel and from the city to others. God will not allow it.
In Jerusalem, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham met with Prime Minister Netanyahu and U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, saying an American decision on action against Iran is weeks, not months away.
The corruption will be seen. Maybe when we standing here today in Geneva, maybe there will be an exposure of some of the corruption that's going on. An exposure because God does not take lightly this kind of deception, and it's got worse.
Yeah, that's right. This is a third round of US brokered talks between Russia and Ukraine, also today, also in Geneva. But despite Russia saying that it wants peace, it's launched another massive strike overnight, with hundreds of attack drones and dozens of ballistic missiles again hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. More than 500,000 people have now endured months without heating amidst a brutal winter. Next week, George, is 4 long bloody years since Russia's massive invasion, and despite all the positive music about chances of a deal, the reality is that huge disagreements remain on the issue of land, and few expecting an end to the war anytime soon.
Welcome to Analysis. Today, we are looking at the negotiations between the United States of America and Iran, which have taken place in Geneva. And we're remembering my father in Geneva in 2015. And so the talks that they've had in the negotiations with Iran have centered around uranium enrichment, sanctions relief, and regional security. And Iran says the United States must prove that it wants a deal. The sanctions remain the leverage point, of course, and markets are already reacting. But what makes this moment stand out is it's not just talks that are happening. It's where they're happening, in Geneva. And we have footage of my dad prophesying from Geneva in 2015. And we're watching these prophecies of my dad begin to culminate into a moment. And so as we stand in this year of 2026 and look back to what was prophesied, we're going to have a very interesting experience, I anticipate. So Christy is going to join us as usual. Christy, are you there?
I am here. Hello.
Thank you for being here again today, Christy. And so tell us about the news, Christy. What is happening?
So negotiations in Geneva are obviously not happening in a vacuum. They come after years of failed agreements, shifting administrations, sanctions pressure, and growing regional instability. Iran is entering these talks with conditions. The United States is balancing diplomacy with military posture, and Israel's watching closely. Global markets are responding in real time. So before we examine what your dad said in Geneva years ago, let's look at what is being reported today, and here are the headlines that are shaping this moment. Fox News is reporting that Iran says the US must prove it wants a nuclear deal in Geneva talks. Fox News reports that Iranian officials are insisting the United States must prove it wants a deal before Tehran makes any major concessions. Iran claims it is open to compromise with the US on a nuclear deal if the administration is willing to discuss lifting sanctions, a senior Iranian official said on Sunday. Majid Takhtravanchi, Iran's deputy foreign minister, also said in an interview that the ball was in America's court to prove that they want to do a deal, adding that if they are sincere, I'm sure we will be on the road to an agreement. That just feels funny to me to have them saying that. What this tells us is this: Iran is not entering Geneva in a posture of retreat. They are entering in a posture of perceived leverage. The New York Post is reporting that Iran diplomat claims we are ready to discuss nuclear program if US is prepared to ease sanctions. The New York Post highlights that Iranian diplomats say that they are ready to discuss the nuclear program, but only if sanctions are part of the conversation from the beginning. This isn't unconditional diplomacy as Iran would want the West to believe. It's transactional. Sanctions relief is the pressure point. Sanctions are working, and it is what's bringing Iran to its knees. Then the SAN is reporting that the US and Iran to resume nuclear talks as Israel presses strike option. We're seeing that Straight Arrow News reports that these negotiations are happening while the United States maintains a significant military presence in the region. Here's this map that we can see, which is a buildup of US military assets in the region, and it's a maximum pressure campaign. While negotiations move forward, the United States has increased its military presence in the region. President Donald Trump said Friday that the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier will deploy to the Middle East, joining existing US assets. CBS News reported that Trump previously approved support of potential Israeli strikes targeting Iran's ballistic missile program if a deal can't be reached. And Marco Rubio described the military posture as protective and said that the U.S. is positioned to defend its forces if necessary. So diplomacy and deterrence are happening side by side. Geneva may look calm, but the backdrop is anything but passive. The Global Banking and Finance Review is reporting this, that oil prices rise 1% ahead of US-Iran nuclear talks. Global Banking and Finance Review reports that oil prices are trading higher as investors weigh the implications of these US and Iran talks. When energy markets react, it's because traders are pricing in risk, not just headlines. And when financial markets begin to move, it's often because investors understand that the stakes are higher than the press conference language. Then we see this from the BBC. The first day of Russia-Ukraine peace talks ends in Geneva. The BBC reports that Russian and Ukrainian delegations are meeting in Geneva today for the third round of US-brokered talks, even as active warfare continues. The BBC says that hours before the delegations met in Switzerland, Moscow carried out a large combined aerial attack on Ukraine, hitting 12 regions with 400 drones and almost 30 missiles. Another key line from the report is that the expectations for a breakthrough do remain low. And what this tells us is that Geneva is not hosting quiet diplomacy. It is hosting negotiations while missiles fly. Russia continues to occupy roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory. Kiev is demanding security guarantees. Moscow has not shifted from its territorial demands, and yet the talks continue. So while Iran negotiates sanctions and nuclear talks in Geneva, Russia and Ukraine are negotiating war and territory in the same city under the shadow of ongoing strikes. Geneva is no longer just a diplomatic hub, it is a pressure chamber. So in summary, what we've got is that Iran is demanding proof that the US wants to negotiate. Sanctions are acting as leverage, and they're working. US military assets are positioned and building by the day. The Trump administration is under a lot of pressure to act. Markets are cautious, and Russia and Ukraine are negotiating while drones strike. And all of this is happening in Geneva, not Vienna, not New York, Geneva. And in March of 2015, Kim Clement was standing in Geneva. Before he ever spoke about confusion during talks, before he addressed corruption, he described something else. He described the atmosphere. He described what he sensed in Geneva to what he had felt before Hurricane Katrina, not predicting a disaster, but describing a heaviness, a spiritual tension. So listen carefully now to how he describes what he felt in that city. And we're going now to March 14th of 2015 from Kim in Geneva, Switzerland. Let's go to that now.
Here we are in Geneva. We've arrived, and I want to remind you of something. Many of you remember the New Orleans and the Hurricane Katrina, and I'll never forget how we were there a few months before, doing some meetings in New Orleans, and there was a really, really heavy, depressed feeling we had. And I remember AT and Hannah were with us, and we had our team with us, some of our team. But that night in the hotel, we were doing some special meetings. Jane had a really bad dream, and she shared it with me. And she doesn't often do that. And she said that she'd had the dreams about dead bodies. And I'll never forget when we left the city. We, as we were going out, we had a flat tire. And while we were waiting there, the oppression was so bad. And I remember turning to AT and saying to him, you know, I'm sensing something really bad. It was just a few months later that I actually prophesied, while I was in Houston, Texas, prophesied the Hurricane Katrina, not by name, but that there would be this massive hurricane in New Orleans. And it's one of the most precise prophecies I've ever had. I said that to tell you that while I'm standing here when we arrived, I had I had the same sense. Not that there was going to be a hurricane or some real bad thing happening, but I sensed something that bothered me, and it was very similar to what I sensed in New Orleans.
Wow, that is so powerful. And, you know, this particular prophecy, we're going to be looking at more from this day, today. But he's not predicting a hurricane, as he says in Geneva, but he's sensing the atmosphere. And, you know, something significant unfolding below the surface or beneath the surface. And if you fast forward to today and look at the negotiations and the tension in Geneva, you know, it looks calm, but there are some serious things going on in Geneva this week.